The train whistle shrieked through the New Mexico territory like a banshee's wail, jolting Josephine Zimmerman from her fitful slumber. Outside her window, the landscape had transformed from the lush greenery of the east to an endless expanse of dust and wilderness that both terrified and fascinated her. It was 1882, and she had left behind everything familiar to chase a dream that now seemed as distant as the horizon that stretched before her. Josephine pressed her gloved hand against the window, feeling the vibration of the Pacific Railroad locomotive beneath her fingers. She had been traveling for nearly a week, her final destination the mining town of White Oaks in Lincoln County. The town's newspaper had advertised for a schoolteacher, offering respectable wages and accommodations. After her father's sudden death had left her penniless in Boston, the opportunity had seemed like divine providence. "We'll be stopping at Carrizozo Station in 15 minutes, miss," the conductor announced, tipping his hat as he passed through the passenger car. "White Oaks coach leaves from there." Josephine nodded her thanks, gathering her belongings, a battered trunk containing her clothes, a few cherished books, and her father's pocket watched the last remnant of the man who had raised her alone after her mother died in childbirth. "First time out west?" asked the elderly woman seated across from her, knitting needles clicking rhythmically in her weathered hands. "Yes," Josephine admitted, smoothing the wrinkles from her traveling suit. Once considered fashionable in Boston, the navy blue ensemble now seemed impractical for the heat and dust of the territory. "It's different here," the woman said, her eyes never leaving her work. "Not like back east. A woman needs to be strong to survive." The train began to slow, wheels screeching against metal rails as Carrizozo Station came into view. It was hardly a station at all, merely a wooden platform with a small building bearing the name of the settlement. Beyond it, a handful of structures huddled together against the vast emptiness of the desert. Josephine felt her stomach knot with apprehension. What had she done? How could she have been so naive as to believe she could simply transplant herself from sophisticated Boston to this primitive wilderness? The platform was crowded with men in dusty clothes, a few women in plain dresses, and several rough-looking characters whose appearances made Josephine clutch her reticule more tightly. She stood uncertainly beside her trunk, searching for any sign of the coach that would take her to White Oaks. "Miss Zimmerman," a gruff voice startled her. She turned to find a man regarding her with undisguised curiosity. He was older, perhaps 50, with a gray-streaked beard and the leathery skin of someone who had spent decades under the harsh desert sun. "Yes, I'm Josephine Zimmerman." "Hank Miller. I drive the stage to White Oaks." He nodded toward a coach that had seen better days, its once red paint faded to a dull rust. "Got room for one more, but we need to get moving. Bandits been active round these parts lately." Josephine felt her blood run cold. Bandits. "Nothing to worry about," Hank said, though his eyes told a different story. "We'll have an escort today." He gestured toward a man leaning against a post several yards away, observing the crowd with watchful eyes. Josephine's gaze followed his gesture, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. The man was tall and lean, dressed in simple clothing, dark trousers, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a worn leather vest. A gun belt encircled his hips, the weapon holstered with practiced care. His features were shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline and the intensity of his posture. As if sensing her scrutiny, he turned his head, and Josephine found herself captured by eyes as blue and deep as the Massachusetts ocean she had left behind. Something electric passed between them, a recognition that defied explanation before he pushed away from the post and approached. "Miss," he said with a slight nod, his voice low and resonant. "I'm Nathan Irwin. I'll be riding with the stage to White Oaks today." "Mr. Irwin is our local deputy," Hank explained. "Sheriff Jenkins asked him to escort the stage, what with the Wells boys being spotted near Apache Pass." "The Wells boys?" Josephine repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Gang of outlaws, Nathan explained, his expression grave. They've been hitting stages and lone travelers between here and White Oaks. His gaze softened as he noted her alarm. Don't worry, Miss Zimmerman. I'll keep you safe. The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet confidence, should not have comforted her as much as it did. Yet Josephine found herself believing him implicitly, even as rational thought told her that one man, deputy or not, could do little against a gang of determined outlaws. We best get moving, Hank interrupted, gesturing for a station hand to load Josephine's trunk onto the coach. Got a good 4 hours ride ahead of us, and I aim to make White Oaks before dark. The stagecoach already held 4 passengers. A salesman with a case of samples, an elderly couple returning from visiting relatives back east, and a young man who introduced himself as a mining engineer heading to White Oaks to assess a new silver claim. Josephine was squeezed between the elderly woman and the salesman, while Nathan Irwin opted to ride up top with Hank. The journey proved far more arduous than Josephine had anticipated. The road, if it could even be called that, was little more than a rutted trail winding through harsh terrain. The coach bounced and swayed with alarming violence, throwing passengers against each other with each new irregularity in the path. First time in the territory, the mining engineer asked kindly, noting her white-knuckled grip on the leather strap hanging from the ceiling. Is it that obvious? Josephine managed a weak smile. Everyone's new at some point, he replied. I'm Thomas Reeves, came out from Pennsylvania 3 years ago, never looked back. Josephine Zimmerman, I'm to be the new schoolteacher in White Oaks. Schoolteacher, the elderly woman perked up. Well, that's wonderful news. Town's been needing someone to educate the young'uns proper like since Miss Holloway ran off with that gambler last spring. Josephine felt her cheeks flush. I hope I can live up to expectations. You'll do fine, Thomas assured her. White Oaks is growing fast. Silver and gold discoveries bringing in new folks every day. Proper community forming now, not just miners and prospectors. The conversation continued, providing Josephine with valuable information about her new home. White Oaks boasted several hundred residents, a newspaper called the Golden Era, 2 hotels, a variety of businesses, and a newly constructed schoolhouse where she would teach. The town was nestled in the Jicarilla Mountains, offering more trees and water than the desert plains they were currently traversing. The stagecoach suddenly lurched to a halt, throwing Josephine forward against the opposite seat. What's happening? The elderly woman whispered, her voice tremulous with fear. Before anyone could answer, the door was yanked open, revealing Nathan Irwin's tense face. Everyone stay inside and keep low, he ordered, his voice quiet but commanding. Hank spotted dust on the ridge. Could be nothing, but better safe than sorry. Josephine peered past him, noting the ridgeline approximately half a mile distant. A cloud of dust was indeed visible, though whether it signified approaching riders or merely a desert whirlwind was impossible to determine. Nathan's eyes met hers briefly. Remember what I said, Miss Zimmerman, you'll be safe. With that, he closed the door and moved away. Through the small window, Josephine watched as he checked his revolver, exchanged words with Hank, then positioned himself on the side of the coach facing the ridge, rifle in hand. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited. The heat inside the coach grew oppressive, and Josephine found it difficult to breathe. She closed her eyes, attempting to control her racing heart with the calming techniques her father had taught her during childhood bouts of anxiety. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. Get down. Thomas Reeves shouted, pulling Josephine to the floor of the coach as bullets began to pepper the vehicle. Outside, she could hear Nathan returning fire, his voice calling out to Hank. The horses whinnied in terror as Hank struggled to control them. Hold on. Hank bellowed, and suddenly the stagecoach lurched forward, picking up speed as the driver urged the team to a gallop. Josephine was thrown against the elderly couple as the coach careened wildly along the trail. More shots rang out, and she heard a bullet thud into the wooden frame mere inches from her head. The salesman was praying loudly, clutching a leather-bound Bible to his chest. Through the window, she caught glimpses of riders pursuing them, 4 or 5 men on horseback gaining ground despite Hank's desperate efforts. Nathan was returning fire methodically, and she saw one of the pursuers fall from his horse. "There's a bend up ahead," Thomas explained, his voice remarkably calm. "If we can make it around that outcropping of rocks, we'll have better cover." The stagecoach hit a deep rut, nearly overturning before righting itself with a sickening lurch. Josephine bit back a scream, tasting blood where she had bitten her lip. They rounded the bend at breakneck speed, the wheels on one side momentarily leaving the ground. As they did, Nathan fired again, and another pursuer clutched his shoulder before falling behind. "Apache Pass is just ahead," the elderly man informed them, his arm protectively around his wife. "If we can make it through there, we're only an hour from White Oaks." The shooting suddenly intensified as their pursuers made a desperate attempt to stop them before they reached the narrow pass. A bullet shattered the window, showering Josephine with fragments of glass. This time, she could not suppress her cry of fear. Above them, she heard a grunt of pain, followed by Nathan's voice calling to Hank. "I'm hit, but it's not bad. Keep going." Josephine's heart constricted at the thought of the deputy wounded while protecting them. The coach continued its wild journey, bouncing over rocks and through shallow gullies as Hank pushed the exhausted horses to their limits. Gradually, the shooting diminished, then ceased altogether. The stagecoach maintained its grueling pace for several more minutes before Hank finally eased the team to a trot, then a walk. "They've given up the chase," Nathan's voice called down. "Probably didn't want to risk the pass. Too easy to get ambushed in there." The passengers collectively exhaled in relief, though no one moved from their positions on the floor of the coach. After several minutes, the vehicle came to a complete stop. The door opened, revealing Nathan's face, now streaked with blood from a wound at his temple. "Everyone all right in there?" 5 shaken passengers nodded wordlessly. "Miss Zimmerman?" His eyes sought hers with particular concern. "I'm unharmed," she managed, though her voice trembled. "But you're wounded." He touched his temple briefly, regarding the blood on his fingers with detachment. "Just a graze." "Bullet hit the coach first, splinter caught me." His gaze remained fixed on her face. "You're bleeding too." Josephine touched her lip, feeling the small cut where she had bitten it. "It's nothing." Hank appeared behind Nathan, his face grim. "Need to check the team and the coach, make sure nothing's too damaged to continue." "Deputy, why don't you help the passengers stretch their legs while I look things over? Could use some water from that stream yonder too." Nathan nodded, offering his hand to Josephine. She took it, allowing him to help her from the coach on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her. His hand was warm and calloused, the grip gentle yet secure. "First time being shot at?" he asked, a hint of wry humor softening his otherwise serious expression. "Is it that obvious?" She echoed her earlier response to Thomas, earning a brief smile from the deputy. "You handled yourself well. Some folks panic, make things worse." He led her to a shady spot beneath a scrubby juniper tree. "Rest here a moment, I'll fetch you some water." As Nathan moved away toward the small stream Hank had indicated, Josephine observed him with new eyes. There was an economy to his movements, a quiet confidence that spoke of a man comfortable with himself and his capabilities. He moved like someone accustomed to danger, yet there was a gentleness in how he treated the shaken passengers that suggested depths beyond the stoic lawman exterior. He returned moments later with his hat filled with water, kneeling beside her and offering it. "Not exactly a china teacup," he apologized, "but it's clean." Josephine drank gratefully, the cool water reviving her spirits. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin, for the water and for protecting us." "Nathan," he corrected gently, "and I was just doing my job. Nevertheless, I'm grateful." "I believe you saved our lives today," he shrugged, uncomfortable with her praise. "The Wells boys aren't known for leaving witnesses. If they'd stopped the coach," He trailed off, unwilling to articulate the fate that would have awaited them. "How badly are you hurt?" she asked, noticing how he winced slightly when he turned his head. "Like I said, just a graze." He touched his temple again. "I've had worse shaving." Despite the tension of the situation, Josephine found herself smiling. "Somehow I doubt that." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared experience, of having faced danger together and emerged on the other side. For a moment, the rest of the world seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them in the shade of the juniper tree. Hank's voice broke the spell. "Coach is sound enough to continue. Few extra holes won't matter none. Horses are tired but should get us to White Oaks before dark." Nathan rose, offering his hand to Josephine once more. "Ready to continue your adventure, Miss Zimmerman?" She placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Josephine," she corrected. "And yes, I believe I am." The remainder of the journey passed without incident, though every passenger started at unexpected sounds and peered anxiously out the windows at passing dust clouds. Nathan remained vigilant, scanning the terrain continuously from his position atop the coach. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the landscape changed. The barren desert gave way to rolling hills dotted with pine and juniper trees. The air grew cooler and fresher as they climbed in elevation. "White Oaks," Thomas announced with satisfaction as a collection of buildings came into view, nestled in a valley with mountains rising beyond. Population about 800 and growing. "You're looking at one of the most promising mining communities in the territory." Josephine leaned toward the window, taking in her first glimpse of her new home. White Oaks appeared surprisingly substantial for a frontier town, with numerous wooden buildings lining a main street, several cross streets and homes scattered across the hillsides. She could make out a church steeple, what appeared to be the schoolhouse, and numerous businesses. The stagecoach rolled down the main street, passing the White Oaks Hotel, the assay office, several saloons, a general store, and the newspaper office where the Golden Era was published. People on the boardwalks stopped to watch their arrival, many waving to Hank or calling greetings to the passengers they recognized. They pulled to a stop in front of the Wells Fargo office, where a small crowd had gathered, apparently alerted to the attack on the stage. Among them was a distinguished-looking man wearing a silver star on his vest. "Sheriff Jenkins," Nathan called down as the coach came to a halt, "had some trouble with the Wells boys near Apache Pass." The sheriff approached, his expression grim. "Anyone hurt?" "Everyone's shaken but mostly unharmed," Nathan replied, jumping down from his position. "We managed to fight them off, maybe wounded a couple. They'll think twice before hitting the stage again." Sheriff Jenkins nodded, then addressed the passengers as they disembarked. "Folks, I apologize for your ordeal. I assure you we're doing everything possible to apprehend these outlaws." His gaze landed on Josephine. "You must be our new schoolteacher." "Josephine Zimmerman, yes," she confirmed, impressed that news of her arrival had preceded her. "We're mighty pleased to have you, Miss Zimmerman. Mrs. Peterson from the school board was supposed to meet you, but when word came about the attack, she went to prepare your lodgings instead." He gestured toward a pleasant-looking two-story house across the street. "That's the schoolmarm's residence. Mrs. Peterson should be waiting for you there." "Thank you, Sheriff," Josephine said, feeling overwhelmed by the events of the day and the reality of her new situation. Nathan appeared at her side. "I'll escort Miss Zimmerman to her residence and make sure her belongings are delivered safely." The sheriff nodded approval before turning his attention to the other passengers and Hank, who was already regaling the crowd with a somewhat embellished account of their adventure. "You don't need to trouble yourself," Josephine told Nathan as he picked up her trunk with ease. "You should have that wound tended to." "It can wait," he insisted, "and it's no trouble. After what we just went through, I'd like to see you safely settled." They crossed the dusty street together, approaching the neat white clapboard house that would be her new home. A small garden bordered the front path, and lace curtains hung in windows that glowed with welcoming lamplight. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair tucked beneath a lace cap. "Miss Zimmerman, thank heavens you're safe." She hurried down the steps to greet them. "We were so worried when word came about the attack." "I'm Alina Peterson, head of the school board." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Peterson. And yes, thanks to Deputy Irwin, we all survived the encounter unscathed." Mrs. Peterson clucked her tongue at the sight of Nathan's wound. "I wouldn't call that unscathed, Nathan Irwin." "You come inside, too. That needs cleaning before it festers." The interior of the house was simply but comfortably furnished, with a parlor, a small dining room, and a kitchen visible on the first floor. A staircase led to what Josephine presumed were bedrooms above. "Your bedroom is upstairs, first door on the right," Mrs. Peterson informed her. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. We have running water, thanks to Mr. Peterson's contraption on the roof. I've stocked the pantry and left a cold supper for you, as I imagine you're exhausted from your journey." "Thank you for your kindness," Josephine said sincerely, touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. "Now, Nathan, you sit right here while I tend to that wound," Mrs. Peterson ordered, pointing to a chair in the kitchen. "Miss Zimmerman, you're welcome to freshen up while I patch up our deputy." Josephine took the opportunity to explore her new home. The bedroom was larger than she had expected, with a comfortable-looking bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk beneath the window, and a small fireplace for winter months. Someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the nightstand, their sweet scent perfuming the air. After washing the dust of travel from her face and hands in the bathroom, which did indeed feature running water, a luxury she hadn't expected, Josephine changed into a fresh blouse and skirt from her trunk. She took a moment to gather herself, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. "What have you gotten yourself into, Josephine Zimmerman?" she whispered to her reflection. Her face was paler than usual, her blue eyes wide with the lingering shock of the day's events. Yet beneath the fear, she recognized something else, a spark of excitement, of challenge accepted. She had come west seeking a new beginning, and she had certainly found one more dramatic than anticipated, but perhaps that was fitting. She was no longer the protected daughter of a Boston professor, but a woman making her own way in a wild and unpredictable land. With that thought bolstering her courage, she descended the stairs to find Mrs. Peterson had finished treating Nathan's wound. The deputy now sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee before him. "Ah, there you are," Mrs. Peterson said. "I was just telling Nathan that school begins Monday morning, so you have tomorrow to settle in and prepare. I've left the class ledger and curriculum notes in the desk at the schoolhouse, which I'll show you tomorrow." "I appreciate that," Josephine said, taking the seat Mrs. Peterson indicated. "Well, I should be getting home to Mr. Peterson. He'll be wondering what's keeping me." The older woman gathered her shawl. "Nathan, you make sure you walk Miss Zimmerman to the schoolhouse tomorrow. Those Wells boys might be licking their wounds, but I don't want her wandering alone until they're caught." After Mrs. Peterson's departure, a slightly awkward silence fell between Josephine and Nathan. He looked different in the warm lamplight of the kitchen, younger, perhaps, and less severe than he had appeared during the stagecoach incident. "You don't have to stay," Josephine said, noticing his fatigue. "I'm sure you have duties to attend to." "Actually, I promised the sheriff I'd keep an eye on you tonight," Nathan admitted. "The Wells gang has been known to hold grudges, and after today's encounter—" He shrugged. Better safe than sorry. A frisson of fear ran through her. "You think they might come here, to White Oaks?" "It's unlikely," he assured her quickly. "But until we know for certain where they are, the sheriff doesn't want to take chances." He hesitated. "I'll sleep in the parlor if that's acceptable, just for tonight." Josephine considered his words. Under normal circumstances, having a man she barely knew stay overnight would be scandalous. But these were hardly normal circumstances, and the thought of being alone after the day's events was less appealing than she cared to admit. "That would be acceptable," she agreed finally. though I hate to inconvenience you further." "It's no inconvenience," he said quietly. "Like I told you earlier, I'll keep you safe. I meant it." There was something in his tone, a sincerity, a depth of commitment that touched her deeply. This man, who had already risked his life for her and the other passengers, was willing to sacrifice his comfort to ensure her continued safety. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, using his first name deliberately. "Not just for this, but for everything today. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." He acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, but she sensed her words had pleased him. They shared the simple meal misses. Peterson had left cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple pie, while Nathan told her more about White Oaks and its inhabitants. The town had sprung up following gold discoveries in 1879 and had grown rapidly in the years since. Unlike many mining towns, it had attracted a substantial number of families rather than just single men, creating a more stable community with genuine civic aspirations. "That's why the school is so important," Nathan explained. "Folks here want their children educated. They're building something meant to last, not just a boom town that'll be abandoned when the mines play out." "And what about you?" Josephine asked, curious about this enigmatic man. "How did you come to be deputy in White Oaks?" Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of memory, perhaps regret. "I was passing through 3 years ago, stopped to earn some money before moving on. Sheriff Jenkins offered me a job after I broke up a fight at the Lucky Strike Saloon. Meant to stay just a few months." He shrugged. "Found I liked it here. And before that—" Nathan hesitated, absently rubbing the back of his neck. "A bit of everything, ranching mainly. Drove cattle up from Texas a few times, scouted for the Army briefly." His tone suggested there was more to the story, but he seemed disinclined to elaborate. Josephine sensed his reluctance and changed the subject. "Tell me about the school. How many students will I have?" The tension eased from his shoulders as he described the 30-odd children who would be in her charge, ranging in age from 6 to 16. Most were the offspring of miners, merchants, or ranchers from the surrounding area. A few were the children of the Hispanic families who had lived in the region long before the arrival of Anglo settlers. "They're good kids mostly," Nathan assured her. "Bit wild sometimes, but eager to learn. The older boys might test you at first, but once you prove you won't be pushed around, they'll settle down. I may look delicate, Deputy Irwin, but I'm made of sterner stuff than appearances suggest," Josephine informed him with a hint of mischief. "I managed classrooms of privileged Boston children who believed their family wealth placed them above discipline. I suspect frontier children, however spirited, will respect authority based on fairness and consistency rather than social position." Nathan's eyes crinkled at the corners, the closest he had come to a full smile. "I believe you'll do just fine, Miss Zimmerman." "Josephine," she reminded him, "after facing outlaws together, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Josephine," he repeated, and she found she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. Later, after providing Nathan with blankets for the parlor sofa, Josephine retired to her bedroom. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Each time she closed her eyes, she relived the terror of the stagecoach attack, the crack of gunfire, the bullet shattering the window, the knowledge that death had come terrifyingly close. When she finally did drift off, her dreams were a chaotic mix of pursuit and danger. She awoke with a start in the darkest hour of night, a scream caught in her throat, her heart pounding like a trapped bird against her ribs. Disoriented in the unfamiliar room, she rose and moved to the window, seeking the comfort of open sky. The town lay quiet beneath a canopy of stars more brilliant than any she had seen in Boston, their cold light silvering rooftops and casting long shadows. A movement below caught her attention. Nathan stood in the small garden, his face turned skyward as if he too found solace in the stars. The moonlight revealed his profile strong, contemplative, and somehow lonely. Without conscious decision, Josephine donned a wrapper over her nightgown and descended the stairs. The front door creaked slightly as she opened it, alerting Nathan to her presence. He turned, hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip before recognition softened his posture. "Josephine, is everything all right? I couldn't sleep," she admitted, stepping onto the porch. The night air was cool against her skin, scented with pine and sage. "Bad dreams." Nathan nodded, understanding. "After what happened today, that's to be expected." "And you, why are you awake at this hour?" He hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I don't sleep well most nights. Too many memories, I guess." The simple admission, clearly difficult for him, touched her deeply. "Do you want to talk about them? The memories?" For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then he sighed, gesturing for her to sit on the porch swing while he leaned against the railing. "I was a Texas Ranger before I came here," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Spent 5 years tracking the worst kinds of men through some of the harshest country you can imagine. Saw things, did things that stay with a man." "What happened?" Josephine asked gently, sensing there was more to the story. "My partner and I were ambushed while pursuing a gang that had robbed a bank in Lerdo. He died. I killed 3 of them before the others fled." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Josephine could sense the pain beneath the controlled exterior. "Afterward, I couldn't stomach it anymore, turned in my badge and drifted for a while. Ended up here." "I'm sorry about your partner," Josephine said softly. Nathan acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "What about you? What brings a Boston lady to a mining town in New Mexico territory?" It was Josephine's turn to choose how much to reveal. She found herself wanting to match his honesty with her own. "My father was a professor of literature at Harvard. After my mother died giving birth to me, he raised me alone, encouraging my education far beyond what was typical for young women. We lived modestly but comfortably on his salary." She paused, the familiar grief welling up. "6 months ago, he collapsed while lecturing. The doctors called it a cerebral hemorrhage. He was gone before I could reach his side." Nathan's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Josephine took a steadying breath before continuing. "After his death, I discovered he had been living beyond his means for years to provide for my education and comfort. The debts consumed what little he had set aside. I was forced to sell our home and most of our possessions. And so you came west." "Yes." "I saw the advertisement for a teacher in White Oaks. The salary offered was better than I could find in Boston, where female teachers are paid less than half what men receive for the same work. Here, at least, my gender seemed less important than my qualifications." "Frontier towns can't afford to maintain all the prejudices of Eastern society," Nathan observed. "Out here, people are judged more on what they can contribute than on their background or gender." "That's what I hoped," Josephine admitted. "That, and I needed to start fresh somewhere, far from the memories and the pity of old acquaintances." They fell silent, 2 people who had sought new beginnings in this remote corner of the territory, drawn together by circumstance and perhaps something more, a recognition of kindred spirits, despite their different backgrounds. "You should try to get some rest," Nathan said eventually. "Tomorrow we'll be busy with preparations for your first day of teaching." Josephine nodded, rising from the swing. "Thank you for sharing your story with me. It helps, somehow, knowing I'm not the only one running from ghosts." "We're not running," Nathan corrected gently. "We're moving forward." "There's a difference." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Josephine felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection, an acknowledgement of mutual understanding. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly seen by another person. "Good night, Nathan," she said softly. "Good night, Josephine. Sleep well." As she returned to her bedroom, Josephine found that the terror of her earlier dreams had receded. In its place was a curious sense of peace, as if in sharing their burdens, both she and Nathan had lightened them somewhat. She slept deeply until dawn, waking to the sound of birds and the rich aroma of coffee brewing. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to her new surroundings, before rising to dress for her first full day in White Oaks. Downstairs, she found Nathan in the kitchen, his hair damp from washing, a fresh bandage on his temple. He had prepared a simple breakfast of coffee, biscuits, and bacon. "Hope you don't mind," he said, looking almost sheepish. "Thought you might be hungry after yesterday's excitement." "Mind." "It's wonderful," Josephine assured him, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I didn't expect to be served breakfast on my first morning." "Don't get used to it," he warned with a hint of humor. "I'm a terrible cook most days. Mrs. Peterson left these biscuits, so all I had to do was warm them." They ate companionably, discussing the day ahead. Nathan would escort Josephine to the schoolhouse, where Mrs. Peterson would introduce her to the facilities and curriculum. Afterward, he would show her around town, ensuring she knew where to find essential services and introducing her to key community members. "What about the Wells gang?" Josephine asked as they prepared to leave. "Should I be concerned about venturing out?" "Sheriff Jenkins sent telegrams to surrounding settlements last night, alerting them to be on the lookout," Nathan explained. "We also have men patrolling the approaches to town. It's unlikely they'd risk coming into White Oaks itself, too many people, too easy to get trapped. But I'll be with you today, just to be safe." The morning proved both productive and enlightening. The schoolhouse was a substantial single-room building with rows of desks, a pot-bellied stove for heat, and a small raised platform at the front where Josephine would teach. Shelves held a surprising number of books donations from families and purchases made through fundraising efforts by the school board. "We believe strongly in education," Mrs. Peterson explained proudly. "Many of us came west to build better lives for our children, and that includes ensuring they're properly schooled." The curriculum was more comprehensive than Josephine had anticipated, covering not only basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also history, geography, literature, and even rudimentary science for the older students. She would have her work cut out for her, managing such a wide range of ages and subjects, but the challenge excited rather than daunted her. After reviewing the class roster and lesson plans, Nathan took her on a tour of White Oaks. The town was larger than it had appeared upon her arrival, with numerous businesses and residential areas spreading up the hillsides surrounding the Central Valley. Besides the commercial establishments on Main Street, there was a community hall that hosted dances and civic meetings, several churches representing different denominations, and a small lending library maintained by volunteers. Throughout the tour, Nathan was greeted with respect and genuine friendliness by virtually everyone they encountered. It was clear he was well-liked and trusted by the community, his quiet competence and integrity recognized and valued. They stopped for lunch at a small cafe run by a French immigrant named Marcel, who served them a delicious meal of venison stew and fresh bread while regaling Josephine with stories of his journey from Paris to New Mexico territory. "The food is marvelous," Josephine told him sincerely. "I never expected to find authentic French cuisine in a mining town." Marcel beamed with pleasure. "Many people come west thinking only to find gold or silver. I come to practice my art where it is appreciated without the competition of 1,000 other chefs. Here, I am unique. In Paris, I was merely one of many." His words resonated with Josephine. In Boston, she had been just another genteel young woman fallen on hard times, her education and abilities unremarkable in a city filled with intellectual tradition. Here, those same qualities made her valuable, even special. As they continued their tour after lunch, Josephine's thoughts returned repeatedly to the man walking beside her. Nathan Irwin intrigued her in ways no man ever had before. His quiet strength, his evident intelligence, and the compassion that he seemed to hide beneath his stoic exterior all combined to create a compelling whole. More than that, there was a connection between them that defied logical explanation, a sense of recognition that had been present from their first meeting on the platform at Carrizozo Station. It was as if some part of her had been waiting for him without knowing it. Such thoughts were dangerously romantic for a woman who had prided herself on practical sensibility. Josephine reminded herself firmly that she had known the man barely 24 hours, and that her primary focus needed to be establishing herself as an effective teacher in her new community. Yet when their hands accidentally brushed as they walked, the jolt of awareness that shot through her was impossible to dismiss as mere fancy. The afternoon concluded with visits to several prominent citizens, including the editor of the Golden Era, who insisted on interviewing Josephine for an article welcoming her to White Oaks, and the mayor, who expressed his personal gratitude for her decision to accept the teaching position. "Education is the foundation of civilization," Mayor Harrison declared pompously. "Without it, we are little better than the savages who roamed these lands before progress arrived." Josephine noted Nathan's slight frown at the mayor's words, but chose to respond diplomatically. "I believe all people value learning in their own ways, Mr. Mayor. The native peoples of this continent had their own systems of education long before European arrival, focusing on knowledge necessary for survival and cultural continuity." The mayor looked briefly nonplussed before recovering his composure. "Ah, yes. Well, very progressive view, Miss Zimmerman. Very modern. I'm sure you'll bring fresh perspectives to our little community." As they left the mayor's office, Nathan's expression held something like approval. "Not many people would correct Harrison on his views of savages," he commented. "Especially not a newcomer hoping to make a good impression. Some impressions aren't worth making if they require compromising one's principles," Josephine replied. "My father taught comparative cultural studies at Harvard and instilled in me a deep respect for diverse traditions of knowledge. Your father sounds like an unusual man." "He was," Josephine agreed, a familiar pang of grief touching her heart. "I miss him terribly." Nathan's hand touched her arm briefly, a gesture of understanding that needed no words. The simple contact comforted her more than elaborate expressions of sympathy ever could. By the time they returned to her house, late that afternoon, Josephine felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. White Oaks was nothing like Boston, yet she had already begun to see how she might build a meaningful life here. "Thank you for today," she told Nathan as they stood on her porch. "I would have been overwhelmed trying to navigate all this on my own." "It was my pleasure," he replied, and she believed he meant it. "The sheriff has asked me to continue escort duty for a few more days until we're certain the Wells boys have moved on. I hope that won't be an imposition." "Not at all," Josephine assured him, perhaps too quickly. "I welcome the company while I'm settling in." Nathan tipped his hat in acknowledgement. "I'll come by in the morning then. School starts at 8, I believe?" "Yes, though I plan to arrive by 7 to prepare. I'll be here at 6:30. His eyes lingered on her face for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Sleep well, Josephine. You too, Nathan." As she watched him walk away down the street, Josephine acknowledged to herself that her interest in the deputy went well beyond gratitude for his protection or appreciation of his guidance. Against all logic and propriety, she was developing feelings for a man she had known for barely a day, a man whose past remained largely mysterious and whose future intentions were unknown. "Don't be a fool," she murmured to herself as she entered the house. "You came here to build a new life, not to lose your heart to the first man who shows you kindness." Yet as she prepared for her first day of teaching, Josephine found her thoughts returning again and again to Nathan's blue eyes, and the way they seemed to see past her careful composure to the woman beneath. The following morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of September warmth as the sun rose higher. Josephine dressed with particular care in a sensible gray skirt and white shirtwaist, her honey blonde hair arranged in a simple but neat bun at the nape of her neck. Her appearance needed to convey both professionalism and approachability, a balance she had learned to strike during her brief teaching experience in Boston. True to his word, Nathan arrived at precisely 6:30, looking refreshed and alert despite their long day previously. He wore the same practical clothing as before, but she noted his shirt was freshly pressed and his boots recently polished. "Nervous?" he asked as they walked toward the schoolhouse, the early morning streets largely deserted save for shopkeepers preparing for the day's business. "A little," Josephine admitted. "First impressions matter greatly, especially with children. If I lose their respect today, regaining it will be tremendously difficult." "You'll do fine," Nathan assured her with quiet confidence. "Just be yourself." The schoolhouse was empty when they arrived, the morning sunlight streaming through its windows to illuminate the rows of desks and the large slate board at the front of the room. Josephine moved about the space, arranging her materials and writing her name on the board in her neat, flowing script. "Miss Zimmerman." Nathan watched her preparations with interest. "What will you teach them first?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I'll start by getting to know them," Josephine explained. "Their names, their interests, their current knowledge levels. Teaching isn't just about imparting information, it's about connecting with each student as an individual." A thoughtful expression crossed Nathan's face. "Wish my teachers had taken that approach. Might have stayed in school longer." Before Josephine could respond to this intriguing glimpse into his background, the schoolhouse door opened, admitting a young boy of perhaps 7 or 8. He stopped short at the sight of Nathan, his eyes widening with unmistakable hero worship. "Deputy Irwin, are you going to be at school today?" The excitement in his voice was palpable. Nathan chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Just helping Miss Zimmerman get settled, Tommy." "This is your new teacher." Tommy turned his attention to Josephine, regarding her with the frank curiosity of childhood. "You're prettier than old Miss Holloway," he announced decisively. "She had a wart on her nose." "Tommy Wilson." A woman's scandalized voice came from the doorway, where a harried-looking mother stood with 2 other children in tow. "You apologize to Miss Zimmerman this instant for such rudeness?" "It's quite all right, Mrs. Wilson, I presume." Josephine intervened smoothly, extending her hand to the flustered woman. "I'm delighted to meet Tommy and to receive such a candid compliment." The tension eased, and Mrs. Wilson smiled gratefully. "Yes, I'm Sarah Wilson. These are my other 2, Elizabeth and James." She nudged the children forward. "Say good morning to your new teacher." More families arrived in quick succession, filling the schoolhouse with the excited chatter of children and the more measured greetings of parents eager to assess the newcomer who would be educating their offspring. Josephine met each family with genuine interest and warmth, storing away names and relationships for future reference. Nathan remained by the door, a reassuring presence as Josephine navigated these crucial first interactions. She noticed how many parents greeted him with evident respect and how he responded to each child by name, occasionally asking about a new puppy or complimenting a girl's hair ribbon. Clearly, his role in the community extended beyond mere law enforcement. As the appointed hour approached, Nathan caught Josephine's eye across the room and gave her an encouraging nod before slipping outside. Through the window, she saw him take up a position on the bench beneath the schoolyard's lone tree, apparently intending to remain nearby during her first day. The knowledge bolstered her confidence as she rang the small bell that signaled the start of classes. The children scrambled to their assigned desks, the youngest at the front, the oldest at the rear, while parents said their final goodbyes and departed. 30 pairs of eyes fixed on Josephine as she stood before them, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs despite her outward composure. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I am Miss Zimmerman, and I am delighted to be your new teacher." By mid-morning, Josephine had assessed the general educational level of her students and begun dividing them into groups based on their abilities rather than strictly by age. The older students were tasked with reading assignments, while she worked with the youngest on basic letter recognition and simple words. At noon, she rang the bell for the lunch break, and the children spilled out into the schoolyard with whoops of relief. Many had brought food from home, while others ran to nearby houses to eat with their families. Josephine sank gratefully into her chair, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before unpacking the simple lunch she had prepared. A knock at the door drew her attention. Nathan stood there, holding a covered basket. "Thought you might be hungry after corralling all those young minds," he said, entering at her gesture of welcome. "Starving, actually," Josephine admitted with a smile. "Teaching is more physically demanding than most people realize." Nathan set the basket on her desk and removed the cloth covering, revealing a selection of cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple slices, along with a jar of lemonade. "Mrs. Peterson's doing," he explained. "She thought your first day might be too busy for proper meal preparation." "That's extraordinarily kind of her," Josephine said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. "Will you join me? There's certainly enough for two." They shared the meal companionably, with Josephine recounting her initial impressions of the students, and Nathan offering insights about their families and backgrounds that might help her connect with them more effectively. "The Sawyer twins are trouble," he warned, referring to two 10-year-old boys who had already disrupted class twice with whispered jokes. "Their father works a claim outside town and is rarely home. Mother does her best, but they need a firm hand." "And young Rosita Garcia hardly spoke a word all morning," Josephine noted. "Her English seems limited, though she clearly understands more than she lets on." "Her family came from Mexico 3 years ago," Nathan explained. "Father works in the mines, mother takes in laundry." "Good people, hardworking. They speak Spanish at home, so Rosita hasn't had much chance to practice English beyond school." "Perhaps I should learn some Spanish," Josephine mused. "It would help not just with Rosita, but with several other children who seem more comfortable in that language." Nathan looked at her with something like admiration. "Most teachers insist students speak only English, regardless of their background." "Language is a bridge, not a barrier," Josephine replied. "If knowing some Spanish helps me reach those children more effectively, then it's worth the effort to learn." Their conversation continued until the lunch hour ended, covering topics from educational theory to community dynamics. Josephine found herself increasingly drawn to Nathan's thoughtful perspectives and genuine concern for the well-being of White Oaks and its inhabitants. As he rose to leave, allowing her to prepare for the afternoon session, Nathan hesitated. "There's a community gathering at the hall Saturday evening," he said, his tone carefully casual. "Sort of a welcome for you and farewell for Dr. Bennett, who's retiring after 20 years as the town physician. Would you consider attending with me?" The invitation surprised and pleased Josephine. "I'd be delighted," she responded, hoping her voice didn't betray her excitement. "What time shall I expect you?" 7 o'clock. It's nothing formal, just music, some dancing, refreshments." 7 would be perfect." A smile transformed Nathan's usually serious features, reaching his eyes and revealing a warmth that made Josephine's heart skip a beat. "I'll look forward to it," he said simply before departing. The remainder of the school day passed in a blur of activity as Josephine continued assessing her students' abilities and establishing classroom routines. By the time she rang the final bell at 4 o'clock, she was exhausted but satisfied with her first day's progress. After the last child had departed, Josephine remained at her desk, recording her observations and planning the next day's lessons. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't immediately notice Nathan's return until his shadow fell across her papers. "Successful day?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Josephine looked up with a smile. "Very much so. The children are bright and eager to learn for the most part. A few will require special attention, but that's to be expected." "Ready to head home? You look tired." "I am rather weary," she admitted, gathering her materials. "But it's a good kind of tired, the satisfaction of work well done." As they walked back toward her house, Josephine became aware of curious glances from townspeople they passed. Several women exchanged knowing looks, while a group of miners outside the assay office nudged each other and grinned as Nathan tipped his hat to them. I believe we're becoming the subject of gossip, Josephine observed quietly. Nathan's expression remained neutral, but she detected a hint of color along his cheekbones. Small towns run on gossip like a mill runs on water, he replied. People will talk regardless of what we do or don't do. Does it bother you? She asked, genuinely curious about his response. He considered the question seriously before answering. Only if it causes you discomfort. My reputation is established here, yours is still forming. I'm not concerned about gossip, Josephine assured him. As long as I conduct myself with propriety and fulfill my responsibilities as a teacher, people can speculate all they wish about my friendships. The slight emphasis she placed on the final word was deliberate, an invitation for Nathan to clarify the nature of their relationship if he chose to do so. But he merely nodded, his expression thoughtful as they continued toward her house. The following days established a pattern. Nathan would escort Josephine to the schoolhouse each morning and return to walk her home in the afternoon. Sometimes he would join her for lunch. Other days, his duties kept him elsewhere. Gradually, Josephine settled into her role as teacher, learning the individual personalities and needs of her students while developing strategies to engage even the most reluctant learners. She also began integrating herself into the broader community, attending a meeting of the Ladies' Aid Society, where she was warmly welcomed by the women of White Oaks. She discovered that Mrs. Peterson's husband was the town's most successful merchant, that the mayor's wife was widely regarded as the finest seamstress in the county, and that the quiet Hispanic woman who sat in the corner working on intricate embroidery was the grandmother of her student Rosita Garcia. Señora Garcia, Josephine greeted her in carefully practiced Spanish. Your granddaughter Rosita is a very bright student. The elderly woman's face lit up with pleasure at being addressed in her native language, however imperfectly. Gracias, Señorita Zimmerman, she replied, her wrinkled hands continuing their nimble work. Rosita says you are a kind teacher. This simple exchange earned Josephine approving nods from several of the other women, particularly those from Hispanic families. By making the effort to bridge cultural differences, she had taken an important step toward acceptance in all segments of the community. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a sense of anticipation that Josephine tried in vain to suppress. The community gathering that evening would be her first social event in White Oaks, and despite her attempts at professional detachment, she couldn't help but view it as something more significant, her first true outing with Nathan. She spent the afternoon preparing, washing her hair and arranging it in a more elaborate style than her usual teaching bun. After much deliberation, she chose a dress of deep blue silk, one of the few fine garments she had retained from her Boston life. The color brought out the blue of her eyes and complemented her fair complexion and honey blonde hair. As 7 o'clock approached, Josephine found herself watching the clock with uncharacteristic nervousness. She had attended countless social functions in Boston, yet none had generated the flutter of anticipation she felt at the prospect of an evening in Nathan's company. The knock at her door came precisely at 7. Josephine took a steadying breath before opening it, then found herself momentarily speechless at the sight of Nathan in formal attire. He wore a well-tailored black suit with a crisp white shirt and string tie, his usually tousled brown hair neatly combed. He had shaved, revealing the strong line of his jaw and the slight cleft in his chin that was normally obscured by stubble. "You look lovely," he said with simple sincerity, his eyes appreciative but respectful as they took in her appearance. "Thank you," Josephine replied, finding her voice. "You clean up rather well yourself, deputy?" A hint of self-consciousness crossed his features. "Don't wear this outfit often," he admitted. "Feels strange after buckskins and denim." "Well, it suits you," she assured him, accepting his offered arm as they set off toward the community hall. The evening air was pleasantly cool, with the first hints of autumn crispness. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and lamps glowed in windows along the street. From the direction of the hall came the sound of fiddle music and laughter. As they approached, Josephine could see that the building had been festively decorated with bunting and lanterns. People of all ages streamed toward the entrance, families with children, young couples, elderly residents supported by their grown children or grandchildren. Inside, the hall was transformed. Long tables lined the walls, laden with food contributed by community members. A small stage at one end accommodated 3 musicians: a fiddler, a guitarist, and a man playing a harmonica. The center of the room had been cleared for dancing, and several couples were already whirling about to a lively tune. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. There was a brief lull in conversation as heads turned in their direction, followed by a wave of greetings and welcoming smiles. Josephine was immediately surrounded by parents of her students, eager to introduce her to spouses or extended family members who hadn't yet met the new teacher. Nathan remained close by, occasionally touching her elbow gently to guide her through the crowd or supplying names when she faltered in remembering someone. His protective presence was unobtrusive but constant, allowing her to navigate the social waters with confidence. Mayor Harrison eventually made his way to the stage, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors," he began pompously. "We are gathered this evening for 2 significant occasions. First, to bid a fond farewell to Dr. Thaddeus Bennett, who has tended our ills, delivered our babies, and mended our injuries for 2 decades. Applause erupted as an elderly gentleman with spectacles and a neatly trimmed white beard acknowledged the recognition with a modest wave. "And second," the mayor continued, "to welcome Miss Josephine Zimmerman, who has traveled all the way from Boston to educate our children and help build the future of White Oaks." All eyes turned to Josephine, who felt her cheeks warm at the sudden attention. Nathan's hand found hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze as applause filled the hall once more. "Speech," someone called, echoed by several other voices. Reluctantly, Josephine made her way to the stage, where Mayor Harrison assisted her with exaggerated gallantry. Facing the assembled townsfolk, she took a deep breath and found her voice. "Thank you for this warm welcome," she began. "In the short time I've been in White Oaks, I've been repeatedly impressed by the community's commitment to education and to creating a place where families can thrive. Your children are bright, curious, and eager to learn, a reflection of the values you have instilled in them." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I came west seeking a new beginning, but I found something more valuable, a sense of belonging that I hadn't expected to discover so quickly or so completely. Thank you for opening your community to me. I look forward to contributing to the growth and development of White Oaks for years to come." Her simple words resonated with the audience, generating enthusiastic applause. As Josephine descended from the stage, her gaze found Nathan's in the crowd. The warmth in his eyes told her that her speech had affected him personally, perhaps because of her expressed intention to remain in White Oaks permanently. The evening progressed with food, conversation, and dancing. Josephine found herself in demand as a dance partner, partnering first with Mayor Harrison for propriety's sake, then with several fathers of her students. She enjoyed the lively reels and square dances, though she noted with growing disappointment that Nathan remained on the sidelines, watching but not participating. During a brief respite, Josephine accepted a cup of punch from Mrs. Peterson and found a relatively quiet corner in which to catch her breath. "The community seems to be embracing you wholeheartedly," the older woman observed with evident satisfaction. "Everyone has been incredibly welcoming," Josephine agreed. "I already feel more at home here than I ever did in Boston after my father died." Mrs. Peterson's eyes softened with understanding. "Loss has a way of reshaping our perceptions of home. Sometimes we need to build anew rather than trying to recapture what's gone." Before Josephine could respond to this unexpectedly profound observation, The musicians began playing a slower, more melodic tune, a waltz that cleared the floor of all but the most confident dancers. Nathan appeared at her side, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Would you care to dance, Josephine?" The simple request sent a flutter of anticipation through her. "I'd be delighted." Mrs. Peterson smiled approvingly as Nathan led Josephine to the dance floor. His hand at her waist was gentle but secure as he guided her into the waltz, his movements surprisingly graceful for a man who spent his days on horseback or patrolling dusty streets. "You dance well," Josephine noted, pleasantly surprised. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted I learn, said a gentleman should know how to dance properly, even on the frontier." "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was," he agreed, a hint of old grief in his voice suggesting she was no longer living. They moved together with increasing confidence, finding a natural harmony in their steps. Josephine was acutely aware of Nathan's nearness, of his hand warm against her waist, of the clean scent of soap and subtle cologne that clung to his formal clothing. "I've been meaning to thank you," she said after a moment, looking up to meet his gaze. "For what?" "For making my transition to White Oaks so much easier than it might have been. For your guidance, your protection, your friendship." Nathan's expression grew serious. "You don't need to thank me for things I've done gladly, Josephine." There was something in his tone, an undercurrent of emotion carefully restrained, that made her heart beat faster. They continued to waltz in silence, the music wrapping around them like a cocoon that temporarily separated them from the curious eyes of the community. When the music ended, neither moved immediately to separate. For a breathless moment, Josephine thought Nathan might say something significant, might give voice to the unspoken connection that had been growing between them since their first meeting. Instead, a commotion at the entrance to the hall broke the spell. Sheriff Jenkins was pushing through the crowd, his expression grim as he sought out Nathan. "Deputy, need you right away," he called. Riders spotted approaching town from the east, might be the Wells gang. Nathan's posture instantly transformed, the formal gentleman vanishing as the lawman reasserted himself. "How many?" he asked, already moving toward the exit, Josephine's hand still clasped in his. "4, maybe 5, Jenkins replied. "Marsh saw them from the lookout point." "They're moving cautiously, like they don't want to be noticed." "Get the men organized," Nathan instructed. "I'll be right behind you." He turned to Josephine, his expression torn between duty and concern. "I need to go, of course," she replied, trying to hide her fear. "Be careful, Nathan." His hand tightened briefly around hers. "Stay here in the hall. It's the safest place right now. Promise me you won't try to return home until we know it's secure." "I promise." He hesitated a moment longer, then shocked both Josephine and the nearby onlookers by leaning forward to press a swift, fierce kiss to her lips. Before she could react, he was gone, following the sheriff out into the night. For several seconds, Josephine stood frozen, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of Nathan's kiss lingered. Around her, the festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by tense conversations and worried expressions. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her side, her face creased with concern. "Come, dear. Let's find somewhere to sit. It may be a long night." The community hall quickly transformed from celebration venue to defensive position. Men who had been dancing minutes earlier now checked weapons and positioned themselves at windows and doors. Women organized children and elderly residents toward the center of the building, where they would be most protected should gunfire erupt. Josephine found herself helping to comfort frightened children, using her teacher's voice and calm demeanor to reassure them while her own heart raced with fear not for herself, but for Nathan, who had rushed toward danger without hesitation. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Through the windows, Josephine could see men moving about the darkened streets, taking up defensive positions around the town. Occasionally, a messenger would arrive with updates, which spread through the hall in whispered conversations. "They've surrounded the bank," someone reported. Sheriff thinks they plan to rob it before dawn. Jenkins and Irwin are organizing men to circle around behind them, came another update, trying to trap them between two forces. Each mention of Nathan's name sent a spike of anxiety through Josephine. The brief, unexpected kiss they had shared now seemed like a poignant farewell, rather than the beginning she had hoped for. As midnight approached, the tension in the hall was palpable. Children had fallen asleep on makeshift pallets, while adults maintained an anxious vigil. Josephine had taken a position near the door, determined to be among the first to know of any developments. The sound of gunfire shattered the night's silence. Several women gasped, and children stirred restlessly in their sleep. The shots were distant but distinct, perhaps at the edge of town, Josephine guessed. More shots followed, then a lengthy exchange of gunfire that seemed to be moving closer to the center of town. Josephine's hands clenched in the fabric of her blue silk dress, now wrinkled and dust-stained from the long evening. "Please be safe," she whispered, a prayer for the man who had promised to protect her and who had, in the process, captured her heart. The gunfire intensified, then abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the sounds of battle had been. Minutes stretched interminably as everyone in the hall waited for news, afraid to hope yet unwilling to surrender to despair. Finally, the door opened. Sheriff Jenkins entered, his clothing disheveled and a bloody bandage wrapped around his left arm. His weary face broke into a smile as he surveyed the anxious faces turned toward him. "It's over," he announced. "We got them. The Wells gang won't be troubling anyone ever again." A collective sigh of relief swept through the hall, followed by questions from all sides. The sheriff raised his hand for silence. "2 dead, 2 captured. The 5th got away, but he's wounded and heading into Apache territory. He won't get far." "Casualties on our side?" someone asked. Jenkins sobered. "Bill Marsh took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc Bennett's patching him up now." He paused. "And Nathan Irwin was hit pretty bad." Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. "How bad?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. The sheriff's eyes found her, filled with sympathy. "Bad enough. Took a bullet meant for me. Doc's with him now at his office." Without conscious thought, Josephine was moving toward the door. Mrs. Peterson caught her arm. "I'll go with you, dear." They hurried through the darkened streets toward the small building that served as Dr. Bennett's office and surgery. Outside, several men stood smoking cigarettes, their expressions somber. They nodded respectfully as Josephine and Mrs. Peterson approached, one stepping aside to allow them entry. The interior was brightly lit with oil lamps. On a surgical table in the center of the room lay Nathan, his formal clothing cut away to expose a wound in his upper chest. Dr. Bennett, looking far from the retiring physician who had been celebrated earlier that evening, worked with swift efficiency, his hands steady despite his age. "Josephine." Nathan's voice was weak but clear, his eyes finding hers the moment she entered. She moved to his side, taking his hand in hers. "I'm here." Dr. Bennett glanced up briefly. "He's lucky." Bullet missed his heart by less than an inch, and it passed clean through without hitting any major blood vessels. He'll need time to recover, but he should heal completely. Relief washed over Josephine with such force that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank God," she whispered. "Told you I'd keep you safe," Nathan murmured, a ghost of his usual half-smile touching his pale lips. "By getting yourself shot. That wasn't part of our agreement, Deputy." "Sometimes protection comes at a price." His fingers tightened around hers. "Worth it, though." Dr. Bennett finished applying a clean bandage to Nathan's wound. "He needs rest now," he informed Josephine, "and he shouldn't be moved for at least a day. I'll stay with him tonight." "No need, Doc," Nathan protested weakly. "You've done enough. Go home to Mrs. Bennett." "Nonsense. I'm not officially retired until my replacement arrives next week. Until then, you're my patient and I'll decide what's best." Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "Perhaps a compromise. Miss Zimmerman could stay with Deputy Irwin tonight, and I'll send my husband to escort Dr. Bennett home." The danger is past now, and I'm sure Nathan would rest better with familiar company. Dr. Bennett considered this suggestion, then nodded. Very well, if Miss Zimmerman is willing. I'll leave instructions for administering pain medication and changing the bandage in the morning. Of course I'm willing, Josephine said firmly, after Dr. Bennett had provided detailed instructions and departed with Mr. Peterson. Josephine found herself alone with Nathan for the first time since their interrupted dance. She pulled a chair close to his bedside, still holding his hand in hers. You frightened me, she admitted softly. When the sheriff said you'd been shot. I'm harder to kill than that, Nathan assured her, though his voice was weakened by pain and blood loss. Been shot before. Survived then, too. That's not as reassuring as you might think, Josephine informed him, trying and failing to sound stern. I prefer the men in my life to remain bullet-free. A faint smile touched Nathan's lips. The men in your life, is there a crowd I should be worried about? The teasing question carried an undertone of genuine inquiry that made Josephine's heart skip a beat. No crowd, she said softly. Just one man in particular who seems determined to place himself between me and danger at every opportunity. Nathan's eyes held hers, their blue depths serious despite his attempt at humor. That kiss, he began, then hesitated. Before I left. I shouldn't have presumed. I'm glad you did, Josephine interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Though I would prefer our next kiss not be immediately followed by gunfire and near-death experiences. His expression softened with wonder and something deeper. Next kiss. In answer, Josephine leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a passion, though the potential for the latter simmered beneath the surface. Now rest, she instructed, settling back in her chair. I'll be here when you wake. Nathan's eyes were already growing heavy, the combined effects of blood loss, pain medication, and emotional exhaustion taking their toll. Josephine, he murmured as he drifted toward sleep. I think I might be falling in love with you. Her heart swelled with joy at the simple declaration. I think I might be falling in love with you too, Nathan Irwin, she whispered, squeezing his hand gently. So you'd better recover quickly, because we have much to discuss when you're well. A peaceful smile settled on his features as he slipped into healing slumber. Josephine maintained her vigil through the night, occasionally moistening his lips with water or adjusting his blanket, but mostly simply watching the steady rise and fall of his chest that confirmed he was alive and on the path to recovery. As dawn light began to filter through the surgery's windows, Josephine reflected on the extraordinary series of events that had brought her to this moment. A week earlier, she had been a stranger on a stagecoach, terrified of the unknown land she had impulsively chosen for her fresh start. Now she sat beside the bed of a man who had come to mean more to her than she had thought possible in so short a time, in a community that already felt like home. The road ahead would not be easy, she had no illusions about that. Nathan's profession placed him in danger regularly, as the previous night had demonstrated all too clearly. Building a life together would require compromises, adjustments, and no small amount of faith. Yet looking at his sleeping face, peaceful despite his injury, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The bond that had formed between them, first of protection, then of friendship, and now of dawning love, was a foundation strong enough to build upon. Outside, White Oaks was awakening to a new day. Merchants opened their shops, miners headed for the hills, and children would soon be making their way to school, where a substitute teacher would greet them in Josephine's absence. Life continued its rhythms, altered but not derailed by the night's violence, and in Dr. Bennett's surgery, a Boston schoolteacher who had sought merely to survive, found herself instead on the threshold of truly living her heart, opening to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. In a land that had initially seemed as alien as the moon, but now promised to become the home she had always sought. Nathan stirred, his eyes opening to find Josephine still at his side. The smile that illuminated his face despite his pain told her everything she needed to know about their future. Whatever came next, they would face it together, the city girl and her cowboy, united by circumstance, bound by choice, and sustained by love in the wild and beautiful land they both now called home. Over the following weeks, Nathan's recovery progressed steadily under Josephine's attentive care. Dr. Bennett's replacement arrived as scheduled, a younger physician named Dr. Maxwell, who had trained in Philadelphia and sought adventure in the West. He pronounced himself impressed with Josephine's nursing skills and Nathan's remarkable constitution. Most men would still be bedridden with such a wound, Dr. Maxwell observed during his third examination of Nathan. You must have the constitution of an ox, deputy. He has the stubbornness of a mule, Josephine corrected with fond exasperation. I can barely keep him from returning to duty, despite your explicit instructions for rest. Nathan had indeed proven to be a challenging patient. By the third day after the shooting, he had insisted on moving from Dr. Bennett's surgery to his own small house on the edge of town, a modest but well-built structure with 2 bedrooms, a comfortable parlor, and a kitchen that showed little evidence of regular use. Propriety demanded that Josephine could not stay overnight to care for him once he was in his own home, but she spent each day there, preparing meals, changing bandages, and ensuring he followed the doctor's orders at least when she was present to enforce them. The arrangement raised eyebrows among some of White Oak's more conservative residents, but Mrs. Peterson effectively silenced potential gossip by arranging a rotation of chaperones, respectable married women, who would arrive each afternoon to sit in Nathan's parlor, ostensibly to keep Josephine company, but in reality to preserve her reputation. It's ridiculous, Nathan grumbled one afternoon as Mrs. Wilson knitted placidly in the corner while Josephine read aloud from a novel she had borrowed from the lending library. We're grown adults, and it's not as if I could attempt any impropriety in this condition, even if I wanted to. Hush, Josephine admonished, though her eyes sparkled with amusement at his frustration. Mrs. Wilson is being very kind to give up her afternoon to satisfy the demands of propriety. Don't mind me, Mrs. Wilson called cheerfully from her corner. I'm half-deaf anyway, or so Mr. Wilson claims whenever he wants to avoid a conversation. This drew reluctant laughter from Nathan, followed by a wince as the movement pulled at his healing wound. Josephine immediately set aside the book and moved to check his bandage, her touch gentle but professional. Their relationship had developed a curious duality in the weeks since the shooting. In public, and under the watchful eyes of their chaperones, they maintained a careful distance, friendly but proper, their growing feelings expressed only in glances and the occasional brush of hands. But in the rare moments, they found themselves truly alone when Mrs. Peterson was delayed, or when Josephine arrived earlier than expected in the morning, they allowed themselves the luxury of greater honesty. Brief kisses, whispered endearments, and conversations about a shared future that grew more concrete with each passing day. By the time Nathan was deemed well enough to resume light duties, 4 weeks after the shooting, their unofficial courtship was common knowledge throughout White Oaks. Mothers of school-aged children made knowing comments about teacher and the deputy within Josephine's hearing, while the men at the Lucky Strike Saloon subjected Nathan to good-natured ribbing about being finally lassoed by a proper Eastern lady. Neither Josephine nor Nathan confirmed or denied the speculation, preferring to keep the precious, growing thing between them sheltered from public scrutiny for as long as possible. But on a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch of Josephine's house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan finally gave voice to what had been building between them since that first meeting at Carrizozo Station. I've been thinking, he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Josephine glanced at him, noting the tension in his posture. A dangerous pastime, she teased gently. This drew a brief smile before his expression returned to serious contemplation. My house is too small, he continued, seemingly changing the subject. Always meant to add on to it, but never found the time or reason. It seems adequate for a bachelor, Josephine observed, uncertain where this conversation was leading. That's just it, Nathan said, turning to face her directly. I don't want to be a bachelor anymore, not since you stepped off that stage and into my life. Josephine's heart began to race, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue at his own pace. I'm not a man of fancy words, Nathan admitted. Never been one for poetry or flowery speeches, but I know what I feel and I know what I want. He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. I love you, Josephine Zimmerman. I think I started falling for you the moment I promised to keep you safe, and I haven't stopped falling since. Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, but she blinked them back, wanting to see his face clearly in this moment. I love you too, Nathan, she said softly, with all my heart. His grip on her hand tightened. Then marry me. Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Let me build onto that house until it's large enough for all the dreams we might have together. The simple, heartfelt proposal touched Josephine more deeply than any elaborate declaration could have done. Yes, she answered without hesitation. I will marry you, Nathan Irwin. The joy that transformed his features was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of his still healing wound, and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the depth of his feelings. When they finally separated, both breathing a little faster and smiling like fools, Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Ordered this from Denver, he explained, opening it to reveal a modest but beautifully crafted gold ring set with a small diamond. It arrived yesterday. It's perfect, Josephine whispered as he slipped it onto her finger. Just perfect. News of their engagement spread through White Oaks with the speed that only small-town gossip networks can achieve. By noon the following day, Josephine had received congratulations from every parent who dropped their children at the schoolhouse, while Nathan endured hearty backslaps and handshakes from seemingly every man in town. We must have a proper engagement party, Mrs. Peterson declared when she cornered them after church on Sunday. Nothing elaborate, just a small gathering to celebrate officially. That's really not necessary, Nathan began, but was swiftly overruled. Nonsense. The town's most eligible bachelor finally deciding to settle down. The new schoolteacher finding love within weeks of arrival. It's the most exciting thing to happen in White Oaks since the discovery of gold in the Jicarilla Mountains. Recognizing defeat when he saw it, Nathan acquiesced with good grace. Just small, please, he requested. And soon. We're hoping for a December wedding, before the worst of winter weather. December seemed both impossibly distant and alarmingly close, as Josephine and Nathan began planning their life together. The practical matters were straightforward enough. They would live in Nathan's house, which he immediately began expanding with the help of friends from town and materials, supplied at cost by Mr. Peterson's mercantile. By Thanksgiving, the modest structure had nearly doubled in size, with a larger kitchen, an expanded parlor perfect for entertaining guests, and a third bedroom that both of them silently acknowledged was intended for the children they hoped to have. Josephine continued teaching, though the school board had already begun discussing potential replacements for when she inevitably resigned to start a family. She found herself surprisingly resistant to the idea of giving up her position permanently. Why should motherhood and teaching be mutually exclusive? She asked Nathan one evening as they reviewed architectural plans for the final phase of the house expansion. In Boston, women are expected to choose between career and family, but isn't the West supposed to offer more progressive opportunities? Nathan considered her question seriously, as he did all her intellectual challenges. No reason you couldn't continue teaching once our children are old enough for school themselves, he suggested. or perhaps arrange a part-time position, sharing duties with another teacher. His ready acceptance of her desire to maintain her professional identity, alongside her future role as wife and mother, only deepened Josephine's certainty that she had found a true partner, a man secure enough in himself to value her ambitions rather than feel threatened by them. As their December wedding date approached, Josephine found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. Less than 6 months earlier, she had been a destitute, grieving daughter in Boston, with no prospects and little hope. Now she stood on the threshold of a new life with a man she loved deeply, in a community that had embraced her as one of their own. "Your father would be proud, Mrs. Peterson told her during the final fitting of her wedding dress, a creation of ivory satin and lace that the mayor's wife had crafted with exquisite attention to detail. "To see you so happy and fulfilled, building a life of meaning and purpose." "I hope so," Josephine replied, blinking back tears as she smoothed the lustrous fabric. "Sometimes I feel guilty for finding such joy when he's gone." "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "What parent wouldn't want their child to find happiness? Your father gave you the education and moral foundation to seize opportunity when it presented itself. His greatest gift to you was preparing you to live well, with or without him." The wisdom in these words comforted Josephine as she prepared for her wedding day. She had no family to stand with her, no father to walk her down the aisle, no mother to offer last-minute advice, yet she did not feel alone. The women of White Oaks had taken her under their collective wing, providing the feminine guidance and support that might otherwise have been missing from this significant transition in her life. December 18, 1882, dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of snow that transformed White Oaks into a scene from a Christmas card. The entire town had turned out for the occasion, filling the small church to capacity and spilling onto the steps outside despite the chilly temperature. Josephine stood in a side room, making final adjustments to her appearance, while Mrs. Peterson, Mrs. Wilson, and several other women fussed around her like mother hens with a single chick. Her honey blonde hair had been arranged in an elegant upswept style, adorned with small white flowers and a delicate veil. The ivory gown fit perfectly, its modest train arranged carefully behind her. "It's time," Mrs. Peterson announced, checking the small watch pinned to her dress. "Are you ready, my dear?" Josephine took a deep breath, her hand instinctively touching the locket around her neck, a gift from her father on her 18th birthday, now containing a small photograph of him on one side and a lock of her mother's hair on the other. "I'm ready," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. In the absence of a father to escort her, Sheriff Jenkins had volunteered to walk Josephine down the aisle. The grizzled lawman looked uncharacteristically polished in a formal suit, his silver hair neatly combed and his usually bristling mustache waxed into submission. "You look beautiful, Miss Zimmerman," he said with genuine admiration as he offered his arm. "Nathan's a lucky man." "I believe we're both fortunate," Josephine replied, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. The church doors opened, and the assembled guests rose to their feet as the organist began playing the traditional wedding march. Josephine's first steps into the church were tentative, her eyes adjusting to the interior lighting and the sea of familiar faces turned in her direction. And then she saw Nathan, standing tall and straight at the altar, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to wonder as he caught sight of her. He wore a new black suit, his brown hair neatly trimmed, his blue eyes never leaving her face as she moved toward him. In that moment, all Josephine's remaining doubts and fears vanished. The path that had led her from privileged Boston intellectual to frontier schoolteacher to beloved bride had been unexpected, occasionally terrifying, but ultimately perfect in its winding way. Sheriff Jenkins placed her hand in Nathan's before stepping aside. The warmth and strength of his grip steadied her as they turned together to face the minister. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in the sacred bonds of matrimony." The ceremony proceeded with traditional simplicity, vows exchanged, rings blessed and placed on fingers, prayers offered for the couple's future happiness and prosperity. Throughout, Nathan's hand remained firmly clasped with Josephine's, a physical manifestation of the connection that had grown between them since that fateful day when he had promised to keep her safe. "By the authority vested in me by God and the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister concluded. "You may kiss your bride." Nathan turned to face Josephine fully, his eyes conveying emotions too profound for words. Gently, he lifted her veil, then cradled her face between his hands as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. The kiss they shared was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together, a sealing of the bond that had formed against all odds in the wild landscape of the West. Applause erupted throughout the church as they turned to face their community as husband and wife. Josephine's cheeks flushed with happiness as Nathan tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and led her down the aisle to the church doors. Outside, despite the December chill, the town had organized an impromptu receiving line. Everyone wanted to congratulate the newlyweds personally, from the wealthiest mine owner to the humblest laborer. Josephine's students pressed forward to present her with a handmade quilt, each child having contributed a square representing something they had learned under her tutelage. The celebration continued at the community hall, transformed once more from its usual utilitarian appearance into a festive venue with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. Tables groaned under the weight of food, contributed by virtually every household in White Oaks, while musicians played cheerful tunes that soon had couples dancing despite the crowded conditions. As twilight fell, Josephine found a quiet moment with her new husband near one of the large windows overlooking the town. Snow had begun falling again, adding to the magical quality of the day. "Happy?" Nathan asked softly, his arm around her waist. "Perfectly," she assured him, leaning against his solid strength. "Though I'll be happier still when we can finally be alone." A smile tugged at his lips. "Soon. Just a few more hours of celebration to endure, then you're all mine, Mrs. Irwin." The new name sent a pleasant shiver through Josephine. Mrs. Nathan Irwin. Wife, partner, future mother. New identities to add to those she already claimed: teacher, friend, community member. "I like the sound of that," she admitted, turning in his arms to face him. "Though I hope you realize you're still stuck with the same opinionated, occasionally stubborn woman you fell in love with." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Nathan assured her, brushing a gentle kiss across her lips. "Your spirit is what drew me to you from the start. I never wanted a meek wife who would simply agree with everything I said." "Good, because you certainly didn't get one," Josephine teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. Their private moment was interrupted by Mrs. Peterson announcing it was time to cut the wedding cake, a magnificent 3-tiered creation that represented weeks of planning and preparation by the town's best bakers. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of tradition and celebration. There were toasts from Sheriff Jenkins and Mayor Harrison, dancing with what seemed like every man in town, while Nathan was similarly claimed by a succession of female partners. And finally, the customary shower of rice as they departed for Nathan's, now their house on the edge of town. A group of enthusiastic well-wishers insisted on escorting them home, singing body-wetting songs that made Josephine blush despite her modern sensibilities. Nathan endured the teasing with good-natured tolerance, though she could sense his growing impatience to be alone with his bride. Finally, they reached the house, now beautifully expanded and renovated for their life together. Nathan surprised Josephine by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a romantic gesture that drew appreciative cheers from their escort, before he firmly closed and locked the door behind them. In the sudden silence, they stood looking at each other, no longer teacher and deputy, no longer courting couple, but husband and wife, with all the intimacy and commitment those roles entailed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," Nathan said softly, taking her hands in his. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," Josephine replied, her voice equally soft. "For keeping your promise to keep me safe and for giving me so much more than safety in the process." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, the home they would build, the family they would create, the love that would sustain them through whatever challenges life might present. As the snow fell gently outside, blanketing white oaks in pristine white, Josephine and Nathan began their married life wrapped in the warmth of a love that had blossomed against all odds in the wild and beautiful land they now shared. Epilogue: 5 years later, the June sun beat down on white oaks with unrelenting intensity, turning the main street into a dusty thoroughfare that shimmered with heat waves. Inside the expanded schoolhouse, now boasting 2 classrooms to accommodate the town's growing population, Josephine Irwin rang the bell, signaling the end of the school year. Children erupted from their desks with whoops of joy, gathering their belongings before streaming toward the doors and the freedom of summer vacation. Josephine watched them go with a mixture of satisfaction and weariness, one hand absently rubbing the small of her back where her advancing pregnancy created a persistent ache. Mrs. Irwin, a small girl with dark braids and serious eyes, hung back as her classmates departed. "I forgot to give you this. Mama made it for the baby." She thrust a carefully wrapped package into Josephine's hands before darting away to join her friends outside. Opening it, Josephine found an exquisitely embroidered baby blanket, the handiwork immediately identifiable as Senora Garcia's Rosita's grandmother, who had become one of Josephine's dearest friends in White Oaks. "A beautiful gift," observed Alina Peterson from the doorway of the second classroom, where she had been teaching the younger children since coming out of retirement to assist when Josephine's first pregnancy had necessitated a reduction in her teaching load. "Senora Garcia's work is always exceptional," Josephine agreed, carefully folding the blanket. "Though I've told everyone I have more than enough baby items from the first 2. Mrs. Peterson chuckled, helping Josephine gather her books and papers. "No woman ever has enough baby items, my dear. Especially with twins the first time around and another one on the way so soon after." Josephine smiled, thinking of her 3-year-old twins, Elizabeth and James, named for her parents, and the new life currently making its presence known with vigorous kicks against her ribs. "Nathan insists this one is a boy, says the baby kicks too hard to be a girl." As if Elizabeth doesn't run circles around most boys her age, Mrs. Peterson scoffed good-naturedly. "That child has more energy than a cyclone. And her father's determination," Josephine added with fond exasperation. "Though James has his quieter strength." They finished organizing the classroom for the summer break, during which the town would repaint the walls and repair any damage from the school year. Josephine would return in September, assuming all went well with the birth in early August, though she had arranged for a former student now studying at a teacher's college in Denver to act as her substitute for the first month if needed. As they stepped out into the schoolyard, Josephine shielded her eyes against the bright sunlight, scanning the street for her expected escort. Her face brightened as she spotted the familiar figure approaching on horseback. Nathan Irwin, now sheriff of Lincoln County following Jenkins' retirement 2 years earlier, rode with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. At 35, he was in the prime of his life, still lean and strong, though a few strands of silver had appeared at his temples, lending him an air of distinguished authority that suited his position. He dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to the schoolyard fence before striding toward Josephine with undisguised pleasure in his expression. "Mrs. Irwin," he greeted her formally, though his eyes danced with private humor. I understand congratulations are in order for completing another successful school year. Thank you, Sheriff, she replied with matching formality, though her lips twitched with suppressed laughter. Your timing is impeccable as always. Nathan's public reserve dissolved as he reached her, one hand gently touching her swollen abdomen while the other cupped her cheek. How are my wife and child today? Eager to get home to the twins, Josephine admitted. Mrs. Wilson promised to keep them only until 4 o'clock. After exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Peterson, who headed toward her own home with promises to visit soon, Nathan helped Josephine onto their wagon deemed safer than horseback in her condition and set off toward their house on the outskirts of town. White oaks had grown considerably in the 5 years since their wedding. The discovery of additional gold and silver deposits had attracted more miners and their families, while the town's reputation for relative stability and strong community institutions had drawn merchants, professionals, and settlers looking for a permanent home rather than just a quick fortune. The Irwin's house had expanded along with the town. What had once been a modest 2-bedroom structure was now a comfortable family home with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a formal parlor, and Nathan's pride a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house, offering shade in summer and views of the surrounding landscape in all seasons. As they approached, the sound of childish laughter greeted them. Elizabeth and James were playing in the front yard under Mrs. Wilson's watchful eye, their dark heads inherited from their father bent together over some fascinating discovery in the grass. Mama, Papa. Elizabeth spotted them first, abandoning whatever had captured her attention to race toward the wagon, her brother following more sedately, but with equal enthusiasm. Nathan lifted both children into the wagon bed, where they immediately began chattering about their day, Elizabeth's narrative punctuated with dramatic gestures, while James waited patiently for his turn to speak. A pattern established almost from the moment they had begun talking. Mrs. Wilson waved goodbye, declining their invitation to stay for dinner, and the Irwin family continued the short distance to their home. Once there, Nathan lifted Josephine carefully from the wagon despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of dismounting unassisted. "Humor me," he murmured, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I like taking care of you, even when you don't need it." The simple admission, spoken without self-consciousness or expectation, embodied the partnership they had built over 5 years of marriage. Each respected the other's independence, while finding joy in the moments of mutual support and care that defined their relationship. The evening passed in comfortable domestic routine. Josephine prepared a simple dinner while Nathan played with the twins in the yard, their squeals of delight floating through the open windows. After the meal, Nathan bathed the children and settled them for the night with a story, his deep voice, weaving tales of noble cowboys and brave settlers that never failed to captivate his offspring. Later, with the house quiet and the children asleep, Josephine and Nathan sat together on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Her head rested against his shoulder, his arm around her expanding waistline, their hands intertwined in a gesture that had become second nature over the years. "I received a letter from the territorial governor today," Nathan said after a comfortable silence. "He's establishing a commission to improve relations between settlers and the Apache. Asked me to serve as a representative from Lincoln County." Josephine lifted her head to study his expression. "And what did you say?" "That I needed to consult my wife before accepting such a commitment." Nathan's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "It would mean travel a week or 2 at a time, several times a year. I'd need to appoint a deputy to handle county matters in my absence." "You should accept," Josephine said without hesitation. "Your experience with both communities makes you ideal for such a role, and the twins and I can manage while you're away, especially with so many friends nearby." Nathan smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I knew you'd say that. Your belief in my capabilities sometimes exceeds my own. Someone needs to remind you of your worth beyond keeping the peace in Lincoln County. Josephine replied lightly, though they both knew her words carried deeper meaning. Over the years, Nathan had gradually shared more of his past with her, the trauma of his time as a Texas Ranger, the nightmares that still occasionally disrupted his sleep, the guilt he carried for actions taken in the line of duty. Josephine had listened without judgment, offering comfort when needed and perspective when requested, her unwavering faith in his essential goodness helping him gradually make peace with his history. "I have something for you," Nathan said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Sort of a school year-end gift." Josephine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Opening it, she found a tiny portrait of the twins on one side, a miniature painted by a traveling artist who had passed through White Oaks the previous month. "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuinely moved by the thoughtful gift. "But what's meant to go on the other side?" "I thought perhaps a likeness of the new baby, once he or she arrives," Nathan suggested. "Or we could wait and commission a portrait of all 3 children together next year." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes, a not uncommon occurrence in her pregnant state, much to her chagrin. "It's perfect either way," she assured him, leaning up to kiss him softly. "Thank you." Nathan helped her fasten the locket around her neck, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years since I first saw you stepping off that stage," he mused. "Looking so proper and Boston-like, yet somehow not out of place even then." "I was terrified," Josephine confessed with a laugh. "Convinced I'd made a terrible mistake coming west. Then this handsome deputy promised to keep me safe, and suddenly the West seemed full of possibility rather than peril." "Best promise I ever made," Nathan said softly, his eyes holding hers in the gathering darkness. "Though I had no idea then how much joy would come from keeping it." As if in agreement, the baby kicked vigorously, causing both parents to laugh as Josephine guided Nathan's hand to feel the movement. "Your son or daughter appears to have opinions on the matter," she observed. "Another strong-willed Irwin," Nathan predicted with mock resignation. "Heaven help us if this one inherits your intellect and my stubbornness." "I believe Elizabeth already holds that particular combination," Josephine reminded him dryly, "while James seems to have your thoughtfulness and my love of books." They fell silent, contemplating the miraculous blend of their characteristics in their children, the visible evidence of their union, and the legacy they were creating together. The night deepened around them, the sounds of White Oaks gradually quieting as businesses closed and families settled for the evening. From their porch, Josephine and Nathan could see the lights of the town below, a constellation of human habitation mirroring the stars above. "Are you happy?" Nathan asked suddenly, his voice hushed in the darkness. "With this life we've built," Josephine turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered with complete honesty. "When I left Boston, I was seeking safety and stability, a place to rebuild after losing everything. Instead, I found love, purpose, family, a true home." Nathan's face softened with emotion as he drew her closer, mindful of her condition. "I love you, Josephine Irwin. More today than yesterday, though not as much as I will tomorrow." "And I love you, Nathan Irwin," she replied, resting her forehead against his. "My protector, my partner, my heart's true home." As they sat wrapped in each other's embrace under the vast New Mexico sky, Josephine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from a Boston professor's daughter to a frontier teacher to a beloved wife and mother. The path had been neither direct nor easy, yet each twist and turn had led inexorably to this moment, this life filled with purpose, connection, and deep, abiding love. The train that had carried her west had been merely the first step on a much longer journey, one that continued to unfold with each passing day, each shared challenge, Each moment of joy in the life she and Nathan had created together in the wild and beautiful land they both now called home. And through it all, Nathan had kept his promise not just to keep her safe from physical danger, but to provide the security of unwavering love, respect, and partnership that allowed both of them to flourish individually and together. In the heart of the once frightening frontier, Josephine Zimmerman Irwin had found not just safety, but the truest form of freedom, the freedom to love and be loved, to contribute meaningfully to her community, and to build a future limited only by the boundaries of their shared dreams.